Welcome back to another episode of Brand Science, where we talk about all things content strategy and personal branding. And part of personal branding is showing up for your audience in a charismatic, empathetic way where they're going to be attracted to the authentic you. And a lot of times that is through camera, podcast appearances, social content, and even public speaking. So that's why today I have on Mitch Carson of Get Interviewed Guaranteed. Beautiful name. He is a talk show host and public speaker, and he is the master of captivating an audience and drawing them in and then making them want to purchase from you. So today, Mitch, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. And I love the name of your show. And it's perfect. We got the memo from our mothers. Wear a black shirt.
Yeah, so, like we said, it hides the blemishes, you know?
Yes, it sure does. Everybody looks great black.
Right. So awesome. Today, I want to start with, you have a great history in TV and public speaking, which has allowed you to be able to captivate audiences and just show up authentically for them. Let's talk about the start of that. What is the kind of quick hero's journey that has gotten you into TV, gotten you into public speaking?
I fell on my face and all of my teeth are replaced now. The first time I spoke, I didn't literally fall on my face, figuratively speaking. I failed my way to success. I was a miserable public speaker, scared, sweaty. There's no way I should have pushed forward. But when people should on me, I step out of it and move forward. And I was terrible, scared, threw up in the bathroom the first time I had to speak in class. An only child, bit of a bookworm, and was by every definition an introvert. So it can be changed. People can change. Some people say, "Oh, nobody changes." Baloney. You can change. I'm a perfect example of it. I've got countless clients who were introverts, and it's a process. And it starts with what's between the gray matter, right between this ear and this ear. It has to work between both ears, both this one and this one. You got to fix this and incorporate some part of your heart, which will help connect to the audience because we're all humans, and that works universally across the world. I've spoken in 63 countries. The formula is exactly the same. Now, there's an overlay of culture that has to be considered with certain differences and distinctions between how you address a Japanese crowd versus Chinese versus people in Dubai. All of that factors. But the important element to understand is fixing your brain first.
So you mentioned that you struggled with I guess presentations and public speaking. What was kind of the catalyst that allowed you to finally figure out, change the thing between the ears here? What was that inspired that?
I'm not big on letting anyone anywhere dictate my future or talk negatively to me. I could dig into my past and what my father said to me at a young age, that I think was the impetus of why I altered my course in life completely, because I was 20 years old, and I remember him telling me, "Your personality sucks. You're not good with people. You should work in a freezer." Now, isn't that an interesting motivation? It's called negative motivation. And he was speaking the truth. He wasn't saying that to motivate me by striking me down and, "Hey, get up, kid." It was his truth, his authentic self saying, "You should stay working in a freezer." Because at the time I was going through college, and the way that I made my money was I was the frozen foods clerk at a grocery store chain in Los Angeles. And him saying that to me, I was an only child. I didn't have a great relationship with him. And sometimes these emotional scars motivate us in different ways. I don't know what your story is, or anybody, the listeners, about their dads, their mothers. My mom was supportive. My dad was not. And he had not achieved much in his life. And I knew I didn't want to be like him. I know this is probably more personal of an answer, but it was my motivator.
Yeah.
And him telling me this, at that point, I said, I do work in a freezer and I'm going to college. I switched majors at that point because of that scarring moment of someone who basically ignored me. I didn't meet him till I was 18 years old. True story. And he came in later. I only met him a few times. And when he made that statement to me, that was his assessment of my personality, because I had yearned for his attention all those years. Never met him until I was 18, came to my high school graduation. And
Wow.
then that time he said this to me, I was 20, 21. I don't remember exactly. I just remember standing outside my apartment building in Hollywood, California. And he came over to see where I was living. And he made that statement to me. We didn't have a dinner together. He just came over to say hi and make excuses and talk shit about my mom. I
Mm,
mean, that was really what he had. That was his intention, more to dump on my mother why he didn't see me. And
yeah.
then he made that statement to me, and that was the motivator for me. It was the switch. I was studying business and I switched to communication because
Mm,
I wasn't going to let this guy tell me what I could and couldn't do in life. And it
sure.
was probably the most profound pivot point for me in my professional career because then I got on and decided, okay, I'm going to take a speech class. I'm going to take a public speaking class and learn how to overcome my fear. And it was dreadful. Oh my God, was that up against all my fears, all of my anxiety, self doubt, all of that surfaced to a massive whitehead, right?
Mm,
And it's like, whoa, I got to squeeze this sucker out. Sorry to be so graphic, but it illustrates the point. Get
sure.
this sucker off my forehead. I was like, I've got a date on Friday night. No, got to get rid of this. And it was a turning point and an emotional one that made me pivot in my mind. It's like, okay, I'm going to improve upon this. It's a kind of a long-winded answer, but I think it's an important one. We've all got
No,
our.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of us, when we're first starting to try to show up, whether it be on camera or public speaking,
Mhm.
or podcasting, doing guest
Sure.
interviews, is we we have to kind of go through the puberty phase, as I like to say. I mean, you mentioned like
Nice.
Whitehead, where we're not great, like we're still
Yeah.
figuring out.
Got to pop
And
that sucker.
yeah, like it's the awkward phase where we don't know, and sometimes I think the catalyst here to get better is either internally us saying, okay, we need to start working on this, or someone comes along and kind of maybe shakes you up a little bit and says, hey, it's shit or get off the pot, because this is not
Pretty
working for
much,
you right now.
man. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
So
much.
so with that, I think that's a great kind of segue into, okay, our audience is probably in a position right now where they do want to start showing up more charismatically, more authentically, and they want to be able to captivate an audience, whether that be, again, through video or public speaking or whatnot. What is kind of the initial steps, right? So say they have some sort of podcast interview coming up, or they have a public speaking engagement, or they have a video that they want to film. How can they, I guess, initially prepare themselves to be their best for that engagement?
Okay, I'll share what I do, and this is what I take my clients through who I train to be on television and or to sell from the stage, because you're selling yourself, albeit a keynote speaker or a platform pitchman, which is where most of the money is made. If you can sell stuff from the stage, your pockets will be full. So it all starts, as I mentioned in the beginning, what's in between your right ear and your left ear. And if you incorporate your heart into your message, you'll connect. How do you do that? I start every presentation with the same ritual. It is a ritual. I follow a standard protocol for myself. I suggest anyone follows this. If you go out on stage, the best of the best in the speaking world, and I've shared the stage with the biggest names in the speaking industry worldwide. I mean, I don't want to brag, but just about anybody that you would know, I've either spoken on the same stage with or shaken hands with. And those speakers, the creme de la creme, the A to A plus speakers, follow the same protocol. We practice. We practice here. We might go through it in our hotel rooms before we get on the stage, before we go through a video. We did a practice run of discussion before we started this, didn't we? I could already tell you're a professional. You thought about what we're going to discuss, and we discussed it. Now we're executing. The same holds true for me. Mental preparation is everything. I meditate. Some people may choose prayer. That's fine for them. Mine is a meditation, and I look at the result at the end. What outcome do I expect to achieve by speaking for the next 90 minutes, 15 minutes, if it's 18 minutes for a TEDx talk? I've done one of those just to tick the box, but I prepared. And I went through exactly what I expect. And then I execute the plan. But it brings me to a best-selling book that I think is important and is relevant and pertains to what we're talking about. The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. There's one point out of that book that was profound and so true. It's called 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. If you practice any particular craft, if you put in 10,000 hours of your time into a specific craft, albeit being a podcast host, albeit being a professional presenter, albeit being a martial arts master, you put in 10,000 hours, all of those traits that you're looking for to achieve will be there. It's simply a reflex at that point. So getting there takes practice. So even today, I mentally prepared before I got on the call with you. I meditated and I said, I'm going to every day in every way, I am getting better, better, and better. That's my personal incantation that I use from a French philosopher named Émile Coué that I learned this from some years ago. And I've been using this for more than 30 years. I don't want to tell my exact age because I'll shock people, but I've been doing it a long time and it works for me. So I would suggest for your listeners, viewers, to have some type of routine. And again, I want to take nothing away from people that practice a particular type of religion, whatever that is for you, or meditation, just do it on a routine basis.
Yeah. No, I think it's one of those like almost obvious but so critical points is like, okay, prepare for what you're about to do, but I don't think a lot of people actually do it. I think we spend more time stressing about the thing than we do
Yes.
actually preparing for the thing, right? So when we're preparing, we're kind of visualizing, okay, what is it? How do I want to show up? What do I want the audience to get from my presentation? What's the end result, my goal of all of this for myself and for the audience? And you mentioned practicing as well. Is there kind of a best way to do that? Is that just literally standing in front of a mirror and just saying it to yourself? Like how do you practice for whether it's on air or on stage?
First, it's the mental preparation. Second, it's the meditation, which is a component of the mental preparation. And I visualize every step of what is going to happen in a short order. Third is I review, if I'm using a PowerPoint presentation, I whisk through it slide by slide by slide. Generally speaking, I'm editing sometimes last minute because of the flow that goes through. So I use a slide a minute and I use a lot of images versus bullets. That can bore people. So I think it's important to create visual imagery. In the beginning of this podcast, I created, I'm sure you're aware of it, a story. I told you about my father. I told you about the pain and the recovery. So there was a before and after. So I get prepared to take people on a journey. So what is it? Your first question was, well, how do I engage an audience? How do I get prepared to engage the audience? I am there with them going through it. I am with them. I'm not separate from them. I am with them. I'm together in this journey.
So you're not just envisioning how you are going to present it, but you're also kind of putting yourself in the audience's shoes to say, okay, how am I feeling as an audience member as I'm consuming that part of the presentation?
Great deduction. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
how I need to be in the audience. physically and mentally, and seeing myself on the stage. How are they receiving me? Am I connecting properly? Am I using vocabulary that they will understand? Because if I use words that they may not understand, I've just caused separation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the kind of golden word from what I'm seeing there is like empathy in a way, in the sense of like making sure that what you're saying is not just you feeling confident about how you're presenting, but also how it's being received by the audience member. So you're
100%.
visualizing that.
It's
Yeah.
the R word. How am
Yeah.
I received? How
Right.
are they getting everything? It's the old copywriter's adage: write in language that is about sixth grade level,
Mhm.
because you never know. Now, if I'm speaking to a group of physicians, I can raise up my vocabulary to match their intellect in most cases. And I have addressed rooms of physicians in my speaking career. So I don't have to limit my vocabulary. If I'm in a room of seniors at a high school, which I haven't done, but I'm imagining that are in their phones and putting their fingers in their ears, I doubt I'm going to use words that I learned in my master's program,
Mhm.
because I'll only create more separation. So, how can you connect to the audience? What words can you use to connect to the audience, either virtually or in person?
So now we're prepared mentally. We've gone through
Right.
and practice what we want to say. And now, let's say we're about to get on air, we're about to get on stage, we're about to press record. Is there any kind of last mile things? Because that's when like the real jitters come in. You know, before I go on, I record podcasts. I get that like
Sure.
pre game jitters, whatever. Is there ways to kind of get us through that moment?
Yes, two ways I'm going to talk about that are so obvious that oftentimes are overlooked. Lubricate, room temperature water. Cold beverages will freeze your vocal cords.
Mm,
Lubricate your vocal cords with room temperature water and drink it before and abundantly and throughout. Keep yourself lubricated. Number two, before I started, I also used something called deep breathing. Did that several times to get myself grounded. And then I come in looking relaxed. Physical body. If I'm hunched forward like this, my voice is going to be restricted. Diaphragm is open. A lot of it comes from my physicality. Be ready. And I'm leaning forward, but not awkwardly. I'm leaning forward to show interest. So I'm into this interview that we're doing. I'm into our connection.
mhm.
I'm doing that. I'm also feeling my voice come from my body, not my throat. It's coming out of my diaphragm. So this part of preparation, visualizing this, and this takes practice.
Yeah.
It goes back to that P word.
Yeah. All right. So great. So then, all right. So this is ready your body,
Ready your body.
I guess, from the vocal side of things, right? Because if you're going to show
Yes.
up, you need to make sure that you pronunciate, that your everything is coming across clearly. And now we are stepping on stage. We are pressing record. We are, going live, on that media outlet.
Sure.
While this is all going on, this is where people usually freeze because it's the pressure's on, right? So how do we maintain what are the tricks to kind of maintain your mental state, also be sharp, and some of those tricks that you were mentioning in terms of making sure that you're showing up so you can communicate most effectively. Like how do we just get on our game while it's actually happening?
I do a couple of things. I'll address both platforms. Let's go live first. Then I'll go back to virtual, such as what we're doing here. In a
Mhm.
live environment, when I take the stage, so to speak, I'm introduced, they have my introduction reel video. So they're already understanding where they're going to go or my background. I might play a bunch of testimonials before I take the stage. So it also revs me up because I'm hearing this. It's an external stimulation. So I'm ready. I'm at my optimal state at that moment. I will take the stage. Then I will strategically walk down from the stage and I will come out and stand in the audience. I do not stand, the stage is a cage. So I tell people that I train, get off the stage, get down at eye level with people, or at least get close to that. Because if you are standing up here, you've separated yourself. Come down, shake hands with people, touch them, touch them. Women, be careful, depends on the environment. You can tap somebody's shoulder. That's usually safe if you're in a room, and these are important distinctions because especially in today's environment, if you tap, I gotta use my pronouns right. Let's say somebody that's outside of your pronoun range. Okay, so you got to tap them on the shoulder. That's fine. Certain people that you can read people. We all have the instinct. Like if I met you, I could shake your hand, no problem. If I reached my hand out, you would shake it, and we'd shake. I'd look at you, give you eye contact. We've created that human connection.
Mhm.
If I shake your hand in an audience of people, they are all shaking my hand because I'm shaking you, who is a member of the club, of the group in the audience. Everybody feels it. The whole audience feels it because I've connected with you. Now let's move to virtual. How do I create? Mitch, you can't get off a stage. You're on a stage. You just got off and went into the crowd. How do you do that virtually? Call people out. It's a simple trick. The best you can is, hey, Shannon, I noticed you're from Saskatchewan, Canada. Have you guys ever seen the sun? I can make something not offensive, but in a comical way just to make the connection. And it could be winter. Have you seen sun in months? I mean, whatever that comes to mind that may tack on to the geography in a fun way. You don't need to say, hey, I notice you're eating a donut. How many pounds overweight are you? You don't need to insult her, but you can certainly talk about the geography. And that's a way to connect, again, to everybody in the audience. Before I begin, I welcome people to a webinar, if it's a live one. If I'm talking live, then I'll go to record it. So
Mhm.
live is the way to connect. Now, I can also, in order to connect to a recorded event, I might tell a story that is relevant and pertinent to the crowd that's listening. You've described your followers, your demographic of people that are going to be listening to this recording. Now, the way that I would connect to people in the audience, I told a story about me that was personal, and I talked about my dad, my father, biological father. Really wasn't much of a dad, but he was a biological father. Everyone, albeit a man or a woman, can relate to that story because we all came from a mother and a father at some point. Now, I suspect, because I saw where your eyes went, you related to your own relationship to your parents. We have no background in discussing that, but you have a relationship, whatever that is, with your father and or mother. You went there because I took you on that story. It's a way to connect. If I were to come out to just a recorded group, and like I said, we did a little prep, we planned before we executed. I had an idea based on what you told me. All right, I don't use the father story too often. It's very rare that I've used that. Maybe 2 times in my life. This is probably the second or third time. Seriously,
Mm.
I don't talk about it, but it was something I pulled out of my file in my brain because it was relevant to our discussion today. So understand who you're speaking to is critical. Message to market match. So M to M,
Love that.
message to market.
And I think that's kind of, yeah, to kind of really summarize that, especially, I mean, it depends on the channel and the medium that you're communicating through, but in some way, step one, soon as you get on stage, whether that's, starting the webinar or actually being on a physical stage, or maybe even
Sure.
as you're just like recording a social video, you want to establish rapport, it sounds like, in some way, right? Like
Correct.
break down this invisible shield or barrier that is separating the two entities. I am presenter, you are audience. We got to have to like break that down into, no, this is a conversation. We are one, we are together, as you're saying. And the ways to do that: storytelling, if you can, physical touch, you know, calling out elements of their location or their life so that they see that you see them. um, and so now it's essentially you've broken down the awkwardness that is typically like audience presenter and kind of the invisible shield that's between it. Is that kind of a way to put it?
A great way. Now let me share where I was nervous. 11 years ago, I spoke in Dubai at an event. I met a Pakistani man who invited me to come over to Karachi, and I spoke at 5 different universities the following week. And it was just, I had a break in my schedule. He invited me over. I'd never been to Pakistan, so I liked the sense of adventure. And I went over and I spoke on the first day to a group of MBA students at the University of Karachi. And during that time, I thought, wow, I wonder if they're going to dislike me. I had all these preconceived notions. I'm not Muslim. I'm American. I'm white. I was scared. I put on a shield. But there were 700 of them. I would get my butt kicked if they went crazy on me. I mean, these are all the thoughts that went through my head. I was nervous. Like, oh my gosh, are they going to kidnap me and ransom? Who's going to, all these crazy thoughts went through my head. How am I going to connect with this audience? So I had to pull something out of my intellectual file to connect with them. Now, I knew enough about Pakistani and Muslim culture because it matters big time. When you go into an environment that's not familiar, isn't Western, you better do your research. I can't go up and touch a woman on the arm or shake her hand. Not allowed, full stop. You don't touch a Muslim woman, especially being an American. Oh my gosh. And other people seeing it, I would be in deep doo-doo. But I found men that loved to hug me. They met me, and these guys, these young people, would come up, big beards, and want to hug me and shake my hand and embrace and take selfies with me. I was like a rock star over there. And that happened even before I got on the stage. These guys would come up with the cameras, and all. The women stood aside. They would take pictures, but I had to stand like this. I learned in advance, like no touching. They would take photos, but they kept their distance. So I had to understand the protocols. I did this before I took the stage, so I already had a connection. So I found a couple guys who were super affectionate and gave me the look like they were dialed into Mitch. Who in the audience can you dial into? This is what I want to share, albeit virtual, recorded. Who is it you're dialing in? Pick somebody that people can relate to. Now, I had 2 men in the audience. One was named Hamid, and the other one, surprising, was named Muhammad. Okay? But they were in the crowd. I kept referring back to them throughout my presentation of an hour. I said, Hamid over here. Hamid, stand up. Stand up and say hello to your classmates. 700 people in the audience, in this auditorium. I said, turn around and wave. Yeah, you can wave to the women too. That's allowed. No touching, but that was my humor. No touching, but you can wave. Ha, 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 ha. Everybody laughed because they knew the rules. I knew the rules. So I created that connection like, oh, I knew the rules. I made fair, decent comedic relief out of that. Mm-hmm. And then I called him, and then I said, oh, and your partner next to you, look at that mustache. I said, come on, stand up. Let's see it. Now twist it, come on. Just like Dudley Do-Right, twist it. Come on. What's your name? Muhammad. I said, good. So we got Muhammad number 2 in the crowd. Say hello to everybody. That's how I created connection. Everybody laughed. Then they loved me. I did that within the first few minutes. Then the rest of my presentation was demystifying American life was the name of my presentation. The 5 common myths, and the first common myth, I went to their stomach. It was gustatory, which is the first was taste. I said, we all eat hamburgers. We all eat cheeseburgers with with fries, which are French, and milkshakes. True or false? And they said, true, true. I said, no, not false. I ate it last week, but not today. Laughter. So use laughter and use something that is universal. Everybody eats something. So I used food as the first connective technique. That's the way I used, and I also was able to make fun of it, being an American. Do we all eat hamburgers? Well, I'm not a vegan. I worked hard for this figure. And they all laughed because I'm kind of a big guy. So I went and I touched my stomach. So I used the power of a prop, and it happened to be my waist. I opened up my jacket and I said, look, there's no six pack here, but I'm hiding a hair pack. Ha 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 ha. You know, so it was a laughter component. So a little bit of self-effacing, and it created connection.
Yeah. So I'm hearing there's a handful of things in there that I want to kind of highlight. So as you
Sure.
mentioned, humor being a huge part of that. I think humor is kind of like a universal language that we can all connect through, and I try to use it as much as possible, as well as the barrier breakdown. If I'm just meeting
Sure.
someone new, drop a quick witty line, and now that person just automatically likes me, just because I got them to laugh. So I think, as you mentioned, like humor, not everyone is, a comedian, but if you can get that first punchline, it sounds like that breaks down the barrier. And then find some sort of common thread between you and the audience. And sometimes that might be a little bit more difficult if it's like culturally different, but as you're saying, find like a universal thing.
Food.
The weather, food, right?
Food is easy. You can come out with a compliment. Guys, I got taken out for a killer meal last night. I loved it. I'm not going to talk about pork because then I've created a bad image. Muslims don't eat pork. So I didn't talk about that. I talked about the fantastic lamb and bread that I had at the such and such restaurant. And they're all smiling because I've created that salivation because everybody eats.
Right.
We have to eat every day if we're
Right.
healthy. So these are some of my safe zone connections. I don't talk about politics. I don't talk about religion. Can I share another story of how I create a connection that started out negative?
Absolutely. These are all great examples that we can use. So
First time I spoke in Australia, George Bush Jr. was in office. So this was about 2007, I guess it was. Would that have been George Bush Jr.? I think it was. And the promoter came to me and said, Mitch, mate. I said, no, Mitch, straight. Don't mate with me. He laughed. Ha ha ha. You're funny, mate. I said, okay. How are you going to get over the fact that they don't like you? To the audience. There were 300 people in the audience. This is a huge selling opportunity for me because I've largely been a platform pitchman. I've done keynoting and emceeing and panel work, but the real money is made in platform pitching. And I traveled a long way. I had landed at 6 a.m. and I was on at 10 a.m. So I had a time for a shower, no sleep, get on stage and go sell. Go sell, Mitch. So that's why he brought me in to sell, to make money for both of us. And I said, how am I going to overcome that they dislike me? I said, what? I cleaned the boogers out of my nose. And he said, no. It's not your hygiene, mate. It's the fact that your president is who they hate because he invaded Iraq and was creating, and of course, Australians had to join because they're part of the Allied forces. And people weren't happy with George W. Bush at that time. How are you going to overcome the hatred of the politics? Because that is going to affect how they receive you. I said, okay, I got it. So I came out on the stage. First thing I did, I stood up on the stage before I got off the stage because it's always my technique. I work the crowd unless I can. If it's a huge arena, obviously I can't do that. But 300 people, I'm going to work the crowd. But I started with timeout. Here's exactly what I came out. After the introduction, I said, timeout. Before I begin, I've got a confession to make. I did not vote for George W. Bush. Standing ovation. They got up and applauded me before I even began. That was my icebreaker. I had a line out the door to buy my product and service, my course, which I was selling. I had a 6-figure day because I used an effective icebreaker. And you have to take into account, not everybody loves Americans like we think. It's not true. We're actually despised in certain countries, and you have to overcome that hurdle before they engage you, because then they'll see you as a human, not as a political figure. So I used our current president at the time, and I put him as the enemy and I joined them. So then I got off the stage and came and shook hands with people before I began my presentation. But that, in fact, was my presentation.
Oh, it's kind of goes back to the whole research part of it or preparation part of it, because it sounds like,
Yeah.
knowing that was kind of part of the preparation, and so that allowed you to have that icebreaker early on. Otherwise, you're walking into a cold room and you don't understand why. So
Oh my
knowing
God.
your audience, knowing what beliefs they already have or strong opinions they're going to have about you or your industry, that's part of that research and practice and prep phase, so you can know how to navigate what you're about to say.
Well, and they have a what is called the tall poppy syndrome in Australia, where if somebody achieves, they all pull them down. We call it the Mexican crabs here in the US. It's the same metaphor. It's like one crab tries to escape the bowl that they're all in, they start pulling at them and pull them down. So over there, they don't want to see people successful. So I had to address that. I learned about their cultural issue with the tall poppy syndrome. And I talked about that. And I said, don't allow anybody to get in your way for your own success. Nobody's going to employ the tall poppy syndrome. So I learned about these cultural mores and distinctions that were unique to Australia. Because if I mention tall poppy syndrome to people who've never been to Australia, they're not going to understand it. But I tell about the Mexican crab story coming out of the bowl, they might understand it, because
Mhm.
that's used more freely, but I would explain it as well. I don't have to explain the tall poppy syndrome to an Australian because they talk about it all the time. But
Mhm.
that was another way of connecting with them, letting them know I understood their culture, understood their pain, understood their resistance, understood the naysayers in their life.
I think that's the prep for that, understanding your audience, and then knowing what's going to be kind of the right story to tell, what's going to be the right joke to use or not use, that's going to resonate with your audience. That sounds like a great way to kind of start what you're talking about. Now I want to kind of get into, as you're presenting, maybe not just what you're saying, but also thinking about how you're saying it. What are some things to be thinking about in terms of maybe like body language, in terms of how you're using your voice, so that you can not just come off, so people can know, like, and trust you by what you're saying, but also just your image, your behavior that also allows people to trust you as well.
I think you have to take the time to be well groomed. I think it matters. And if you are catering to an audience of females who are matched in there, let's say we have a good balance of men and women. Excuse me if I'm not using the right pronouns, but you get if you're of people, let's just call it of people, so I don't offend anyone. Take the time to look your best. Look your best, whatever that is. Today, people aren't wearing ties like they used to, so you don't need to wear ties necessarily. The look is a little more open. I would encourage you to make sure your shoes are clean and or shined if you're wearing shinable shoes. Make sure you're pressed. You've taken the time to look your best for them. They expect it. It might be subconscious or unconscious. They do expect a presenter to be prepared. They expect a presenter to be on time. They expect a presenter to understand them, what their needs are, what their wants are, Your personal stories don't matter unless it relates to them directly, unless they can relate to it. I used a generic example at the beginning. I'm going back to what I started with. My father. We've all got one, or we wouldn't be here. We certainly wouldn't have facial hair without it. So that we got to go back to what is it that everybody can universally relate to, and that related to all genders, all pronouns, if you will, because that is, we all come from it. So if I were just to relate to a volleyball metaphor, which you and I both have played, that would limit our connection, wouldn't it? Because not everybody plays volleyball like we did.
Right.
If I just talked, unless I made it applicable for everybody to understand as my own personal story, but my story about a father, everybody could relate to. So keep that in mind. What story, what situation can everybody in the audience relate to, or get most of them to relate to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. And kind of what I love to do at the end of these episodes that I'm recently doing is kind of this bonus round
Okay.
where fire off a few questions related to your career and to the industry as kind of like an extra little gift at the end of the
Sure.
episode here. So you have an extensive background in really personal branding, being that you're on air, you're public speaking. What has been one of the most um, I guess, instances in your life that your personal brand has awarded you that you didn't see coming? It's not monetary, but it's kind of this reward or byproduct of investing into your personal brand that was kind of a shock to you.
I knew being a published author mattered. I did not know how much of a pivot point and how pivotal it was going to be for me until it proved itself to be true. I had a group of 35 speakers. 38 were in Dubai with me that I was training to get on stage and use Dubai as a platform to show their expertise. 35 of them traveled with me to Bahrain, a neighboring country, 1 hour flight in the OPEC region. We were there, 3 TV channels in the back of the room, filming us because in the front row was the governor of Bahrain, which was the brother to the king. So, royal family member, surrounded by bodyguards. I had 35 speakers with me. I was the only one. Now, it was my event. I was the leader, and all these people there that wanted the international experience and exposure. But what I did changed the course of our history for all of us by one simple move. I used the book that I had published, took it out, signed in blue ink, not black ink, blue ink, and signed it and said, "Mr. Governor, sir, I'd like to give you a gift. My book, I want to have the privilege of giving it to you." I worked the media in the back of the room. The cameras were on me. I stood him up. I said, "May I present this to you?" So he got up out of his chair. Bodyguards were looking at me with their fierce beards. What is this American guy doing to our governor, royal family member? And I had the permission because I was gifting him something. I was giving him a book to spin him around. He was facing me. I was facing the cameras in the back, but I spun him like a top, 180 degrees. Spun him around. I said, "This is for you." So I manipulated him. Normally, you can't touch a royal family member, but I was gifting him something. So I spun him around to look at the cameras in the back. "Okay, Mr. Governor, turn around." I said, "I have this gift for you." And I finished it with his name. Of course, I researched him in advance, and I signed it in blue ink, handed it to him with two hands, handed it to him. And I said, "Look at the cameras in the back." Now, what did he do? There's something I learned about Islamic culture. If you give somebody something in their culture, and I think this is one of the great attributes of them, at least in Bahrain, he read my book, which was over 50,000 words, published by John Wiley and Sons, called The Silent Salesman, MEN. He read it overnight, and he sent through one of his underlings a message: have them all come the next day to the Royal Palace for high tea. So we got to go to the Royal Palace and have tea with the governor in a big ark. And they served us dates and high tea, where they use these carrot, they pour it from above, and we got to sit there, ask him questions. He read my book overnight, said thank you, and because I gave him something, he had to reciprocate.
Damn. I mean,
Yeah.
that I wasn't expecting that answer. I thought it was going to be, you know.
I didn't think I was going to share it, but that was the answer. So
No,
sometimes,
there you go, audience. You invest into your personal brand, you'll end up in some sharing a dinner with a government official overseas, potentially. That's the
royal family member.
Sure.
That's the key, is he was part of the royal family.
Yeah. That's
And
incredible.
And I got to turn him. I put my hands on him. I would have never done it if it were a woman. Couldn't have been the princess. Can't touch them. I would have been executed. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
So him, I was able to manipulate and turn around. He was just a very nice man and smart, educated in America.
Love it. Mitch, this has been awesome. I think, to kind of recap today, what we learned is how to kind of mentally prepare and physically prepare for presenting, whether it be over social posts, public speaking, podcasts, maybe on air, and the steps we need to take in order to do that. And then while we're on stage, while we're recording, while we're presenting a webinar, how we can connect and remove barriers between us and our audience. And then, really find ways to be a little bit more likable and trustworthy as we're presenting, and really show up authentically as well. I want to make sure people are able to find you, because I know you have a lot of value to deliver even after this podcast. So if people wanted to learn more about you and the services you provide, where can they go?
GetInterviewedGuaranteed.com/meet with Mitch. GetInterviewedGuaranteed.com/meet with Mitch. Or if they want to just email me with a question, Mitch@MitchCarson.com. Another option.
Love it. And if you listen to today's episode and that's how you're finding them, make sure you mention that as well. That way he'll know where you're coming from. So, Mitch, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, man.
Okay, bud. I appreciate you.